Every day is a day of opportunity, isn't it? A day to make a decision. Everybody loves decisions. You like making decisions? Have you already decided where you're going to go eat afterwards? Or have you got something cooking at home? Decisions can be something that we make thoughtfully. Decisions can be something that we just do because it's kind of ingrained in us. In fact, we make more decisions than we realize we make because we create routines, patterns, habits. Some that are good, some that are not so much. But decisions are important. What time will I get up in the morning? Okay? For those of you who don't have anything going on in the morning, you're like, how late can I sleep in? For those of you who've got a schedule and you know you've got to get up for work or you've got to be someplace at a certain time, you know, in fact, you can pretty much guess your whole week is scheduled and your alarm is going off at one set time and that's just the routine. You don't even have to think about it. It's not a decision anymore. You just do it. Maybe let me ask you a question that's more pertinent. Are you going to come to church next week? Oh, okay, good, because I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm watching you nod, thinking, okay, good. I expect to see you here next week. That's one of those questions that most people, they don't make up their mind on that until maybe, who knows, Saturday night. How late was I out? How tired am I? What's going on the next day? All these other factors come into the decision-making process. Will I go to church next week? I don't know. Well, let me tell you what. That's a decision I've already made. I'll be in church next week. That's good news, right? The good news, even more so than that, is the fact that I made that decision a long time ago while I was still in high school. Even when I went to college, I decided, church is going to be a part of my life. I'm going to be there every week. Now, for a while, it rotated to a Wednesday program, something like that. But I was constantly making that decision. In fact, the truth is, it wasn't really even a decision. It just became a part of who I was, a healthy habit that determined who I was in life. Let me ask this, parents. Do you wake up in the morning and decide if that particular day you want to have kids? Some of you are going, yeah, I wish I could make that decision. That'd be easy if I could give them back on any particular day. Who knows? No, see, that was a decision. It was made, and now you live with, the consequences. You live with the joy, and you live with the opportunity of being a parent. But that's a decision that is an everyday fact of life. It's become a part of who you are. Some decisions simply get to a point where they're not decisions anymore. Some things, they are just not a part of an option to choose. In fact, some things just become determinations. They become lifestyle choices. They become a part of our identity. They become a part of our routine. They become that healthy or that unhealthy habit of who we are. The truth is, decisions can be difficult. Decisions can be exhausting. Decisions can be destructive. In fact, how many of you have heard of the phrase decision fatigue? Familiar with that? Okay, decision fatigue is a reality. In fact, the more decisions you have to make, the faster you have to make those decisions, or the higher stress level, the more intense the decision, or the more impact that it has, the more of those decisions you have to make on a regular basis, you reach a point of what they call decision fatigue, where all of a sudden your decisions are, not as well thought out. In fact, maybe they're poorer decisions. Maybe they're not actually filtered the way they should be through a thoughtful process. There's also this thing called analysis paralysis. Anybody really like to analyze things before you make a decision? Some people. Have you ever heard of it? Where you just analyze, and then you think about it again, and you think about it from this angle, and then from that angle, and every possible angle until you've thought it through so completely that you absolutely cannot even make a decision. It's called analysis paralysis. So you get to the point where you are paralyzed from actually making a decision. Another problem our culture runs into is vacillating back and forth. Maybe this, you can think of it as trend decision making. Oh, those are the in pants. I got to have those things right now. Or that's the in movie. I've got to go see that one tonight. Or whatever the trend is. Or maybe it's peer pressure. Peer pressure that helps us determine how we're going to make our decisions or what decisions we'll make. Maybe we're a bandwagon jumper. We jump on or off whatever the bandwagon is for whatever the best playing team is right now. Or maybe we simply avoid decisions altogether. Truth is, decisions are important, aren't they? Decisions are a part of everyday life and reality. Decisions are something that we have to engage in whether we want to or not. To get here this morning, you had to decide what you were going to put on. Sometimes I've heard from some women that is the toughest choice of the day. What in the heck am I going to wear? Decisions are important, aren't they? Our passage today, it's one of those that's pretty famous. One of those that you're pretty familiar with, whether you've realized it or not. It's that phrase that says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." In fact, I wore the tie that says that. "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I wore that just for the scripture today. But what we don't necessarily see is the fullness of the context of this passage. Joshua is proclaiming this to the whole of the nation of Israel right at the end of his life. He's proclaiming it to all of those individuals in the community of faith and basically giving them an opportunity to make a decision. And by the way, he's not proclaiming this at the beginning of his life. He's not 20 years old and say, "Hey, I've got a long life to live, and I'm going to tell you right now that I'm going to live my life for God. I'm going to serve God the rest of my life." He's not doing that. In fact, he's doing it kind of what we might think in reverse order. He's at the very end of his life. Literally, he's going to depart and die, and the rest of this commitment or covenant following God is going to be left on the shoulders of the Israelites. So he's at the end of his life, and he's saying, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Well, who's his house? "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I think the part of the power in this is the fact that it's not that he will, it's that he already has. He's demonstrated a faithful life. He's lived his life to the fullest. He's turned to God in front of all of the nation of Israel, turned to God at important moments and said, "God, how do I make this decision? What decision do you want me to make? How should I move forward?" He trusted God in order to help make the decisions for himself and for the nation. And then he stands before the nation and says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Now, by the way, this is not the first time that this has happened. Let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 32. We find that Moses did something very similar. Remember, Moses brought the Israelites out of Egypt, and then they wandered the desert for 40 years, and he oversaw them during that time and kept them safe and received the 10 Commandments and all of this important stuff that Moses did. But because he broke faith with God for one short moment, God wouldn't let him enter the promised land. So before Joshua led the Israelites into the promised land, Moses stood before them. He'd gone up on a mountain and met with God. God showed him the promised land, but he couldn't enter. And he wrote down this poem in Deuteronomy 32 about the importance of holding faith with God, about serving God, about not turning to these other gods. And he wrote it all out, and then he came down and he proclaimed it to everybody. He says, "Hold fast. Follow God. Serve God with all of your heart, soul, strength, and mind." He pretty much laid it out. Also the negatives if they didn't follow God. So again, we find Joshua at the end of his life mirroring exactly what Moses did. But whereas Moses handed the leadership over to Joshua, Joshua did something unique. Joshua did something different that I think is very powerful. And if you'll jump with me to verse 27, it says this. It says, "And Joshua said to the people, 'You see this stone? It will be a witness against us, for it has heard all of the words the Lord has spoken to us, and it will be a witness against you if you ever deny your God.'" Whew. Okay, so now the authority, the responsibility was handed from Moses to Joshua. Now Joshua's handing over the oversight, the accountability, the witness part of their covenant relationship with God to a rock. Now, to you that might sound like, well, that sounds pretty silly. That rock can't say much against me, can it? That rock can't really do anything if I mess it up, can it? But do you understand what he's really saying? Do you understand the power of the symbolism that he's using? He's basically saying this rock, this piece of creation, is going to hold you accountable to whether or not you served God. Let's actually apply it to the rest of the Old Testament, because throughout the Old Testament you find scripture over and over that says the rocks, the hills, the trees, the mountains, the rivers, the streams, all things created will proclaim the glory of God. And in fact, if the very image of God, we just got done preaching about last month, if the image of God fails to proclaim the glory of God, fails to serve God, that creation, the rocks, the hills, the trees, it will still proclaim God's glory, even when we fail. So Joshua is saying now this rock, all of creation, in fact, has become a witness to this covenant, and in fact has become the designated accountability partner for us to see whether or not we will serve God in our life. I don't know about you, but I understand the value of an accountability partner. Throughout my life, I've liked to exercise, but it's not been necessarily the priority. You know, how you just kind of fit things in. And so it's like, from noon till 4, sometime in that time period, I like to schedule a run or a bike ride or some workout of some kind. And yet, when I schedule it in the middle of the day from noon to 4, guess what inevitably happens? At least 3 times out of 4. I get a phone call. Something else gets scheduled. Somebody says, I really need to talk. There's an emergency. There's a police call. Who knows what it actually comes up? But something gets in the way of that activity that I kind of said was important or I wanted to do. Maybe I should have prioritized it in a different way. How do I make my decision whether or not I'm actually going to work out or prioritize that above something else? Does that mean I need to change the way that I make a decision? Well, let me say, as a part of my doctoral program, redeeming the routines and working on my own life and choices and health of ministry and other things, one of the decisions and commitments that I made over a month ago is I was going to get up at 5:30 in the morning, because it's the only time that I can be sure that I'm not going to be interrupted. It's the only time that I can be sure that I can have some time for myself to actually be healthy, whether it's physically, spiritually, or otherwise. And the spiritual part, that's one thing that fits, but I've never prioritized exercise in that way. Well, making that commitment, let me just say that in the process of that commitment, I shared that commitment with my doctoral professor. You might call that a mistake. Because if you want to talk about accountability, the guy that I really look up to and admire and invited me into this doctoral program, and he says, hey, if you really want to do that, I can work with you. He says, you've got a Garmin? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, okay, you can log your workout every morning and you can upload it to trainingpeaks.com. I'm like, oh, really? This sounds great. And actually, it is great, because I found out it keeps track of your stress load and it keeps track of your fatigue and so forth, and gives you ideas for different workout plans. What I didn't quite know I was getting into is I now have an accountability partner who's literally checking on my workout routine every day. Somebody that I look up to and admire and that I don't want to disappoint. And he can check my heart rate, my elevation change, every detail that I'm not necessarily sure I want to be completely vulnerable and open about. But knowing that I'm sharing that with somebody makes a difference. And let me tell you, for the last over a month, I've been getting up actually before my alarm has gone off. There's been like twice that my alarm has actually gone off, because it's become a priority. It's become something that actually is above and before everything else in the day. Setting that time aside in the morning is essential, and it's actually getting to the point where it is such a routine, and the decision is not even a question of, hey, I'm really exhausted tonight. Am I going to get up in the morning or not? It's not a question anymore. It's already a decided fact. The only question is, what's the routine going to be? What exercise will take the place in that time? See, you can make the same decision so regularly that it's no longer a decision to be made, but it becomes a healthy habit. You're familiar with this. I think Covey says it's 21 days to create a habit, but I'm convinced it's more like 40 some, to create a solid habit that sticks with you. But I'm convinced that one of the most important parts of creating that healthy habit out of a decision is the accountability partner. Who's following up? Who are you entrusting? Who are you allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to that they can hold you accountable to your life choices, to your decisions, whether they're spiritual and in discipleship process of studying the Bible or the Word, or whether it's in health and exercise. You see, the truth is when we come to a crossroads in life, when we need to make a clear decision that is for our life, it needs to not just be a flippant decision. It needs to not be something that's trend-based, not something that is decision fatigue oriented, where I'm just so stressed and I know I have to make a decision. We need to make decisions that are determined, that are based on a lifestyle choice. We need to make decisions that we know there are consequences to if we fall short. We need to make decisions that have an accountability partner that will hold us to it. We need to make decisions so repeatedly that they become a habit, a healthy habit. When I look at Joshua, I see that Joshua is standing before the whole of the nation of Israel, and Joshua is proclaiming his healthy lifestyle habit of serving the Lord. And he's doing it after he's already demonstrated it day after day, putting God first in his life, seeking God in prayer for wisdom before making a decision, honoring God with lifestyle choices, and talking to people over and over about how important it was that they would do the same in everyday life. What I want to tell you today is faith in God, giving God priority in your life, really it shouldn't be a choice. Whether or not we're going to show up in church next week, it really shouldn't be a choice. It shouldn't be a decision. It should be more of this is a sure thing. This is the biggest priority in my life. Spending time with God is the biggest priority. And the truth is, when we get to that point that it is past making a decision about it, it becomes not decision fatigue, not analysis paralysis, not about a crossroads in life. It's more about faith being that certainty. Faith being the thing that can carry you through times of difficulty. Faith being that rock and that foundation that you need. Church being there when you need it. Truth is, God can be our anchor, our sure foundation, our solid ground. God can be your daily, healthy routine. I just don't think we think about it that way. I think for most of us, we haven't had somebody like Joshua stand in front of us and say, choose for yourselves this day who you will serve. By the way, I'm going to point this out too. Joshua doesn't say, choose in whom you will believe. He says, choose this day whom you will serve. It's an action word of putting your belief into action. Serving God is an action. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And lo, as he continues on, this rock will hold you accountable. This rock will be the testimony against you if you fail. All of creation will proclaim the glory of God. The question remains is, what decision will you make?